So chat, picture this. We have a TV show about a teen mom who had a child at 15 and brought up that child in constant instability, and the mother actually murdered people and committed crime. Yet that child is somehow more disliked than the mother? If you have seen Ginny and Georgia, you will know that this summary is a slight oversimplification. But what is absolutely not an oversimplification is that there is a certain stilt in the way that other 16-year-old Ginny and her adult mother Georgia are perceived. Seriously, this show has one of the weirdest online footprints I had ever seen. But Ginny and Georgia as a show is hell of a weird on its own. I feel like the show had immense potential to be actually great. I mean, just look at the subject matter. A teen mom who underwent insane amounts of trauma has to raise her kids. It has a ton of things that it can say, but I am not sure that it always does. Anyways, and a lot of the show is reduced online into people kind of dragging the show, or specifically Ginny, left and right. I cannot tell you just how many times I have seen that out of context scene of Ginny walking up and doing the salute. And I mean, it is still hella cringe, but it's not as cringe when you factor in the fact that she is yapping about power and is kind of threatening Marcus in a very roundabout way since it's the same salute he did the night before, which perfectly encapsulates the sad state of affairs surrounding Ginny and Georgia. People often focus on the wrong things to be able to hate on Ginny more than they should. Some context is missing, and even that context usually doesn't make things all that better. And what I am trying to say here is that there is no one innocent party here when it comes to how Ginny is perceived. The discourse around the show can be frigging weird, and that is on God. But the show sometimes doesn't do itself many favors either. This isn't always the case, but it certainly doesn't help that the show isn't very well written. So let's unpack all of that. Let's start a bit backwards, with Season 2. You see, the interesting thing about Season 2 is that it acts kinda as a response to the feedback of the first season. The feedback for the first season in general can be boiled down to Season 1 cringe, Season 1 Ginny bad, Georgia good. So what does the show do? Season 2 introduces Ginny going to therapy and kinda having a making up arc with her mom, and shows Georgia to be just so ever more horrible than before. Ginny going to therapy to sort out some of her very real issues is a valid course of action for the show. Also kinda very on-the-nose device for the show to spell out exactly what's up. They also introduce a rubber band that Ginny uses to indicate her turmoil, just so that no one would be confused about what is happening. So they are making extra sure. Okay, that is fine. And you know, it would be kind of okay if some of these sessions didn't seem so lackluster. This doesn't really come as a surprise. TV shows, especially of this caliber, are not exactly known to be perfect representations of how therapy works. They are not supposed to be. Do I expect them to show therapy sessions in an extreme and grueling detail in order to be realistic? Well, no, not exactly. But the way that the therapy sessions come off now seem to be just there in small snippets to serve as whatever narrative is happening in the episode. Like, the very first session comes around, and the therapist is just straight up like,
"Your dad said you've been self-harming. You haven't mentioned that yet. Let's talk about it."
what is this speedrunning, you know? I do not know about y'all, but I wouldn't necessarily feel comfortable with that approach. Other sessions are, I guess, okay. They get Ginny from point A to point B, aka where the script wants her to progress. And just in general, TV depictions of therapy are a controlled environment which can lead to wherever the writers want it to lead. I cannot attest to the realism of the depiction of therapy progression. I am not a professional, but it can sometimes feel like it's just a plot device, and the therapist is just a hostage of the script. Then in season 2, we also have Georgia begin kinda emotionally manipulate Cynthia for an entire season and exploit her moment of weakness to try and weasel herself further into Wellsbury. Sure, she very masterfully says how much she relates to Cynthia, and that sounds as convincing as you could expect from Georgia. This all results in her doing this mercy killing and suffocating Cynthia's dying husband as a favor to her. I suppose it is kinda their piss-poor attempt at making it clearer to the audience how actually unhinged Georgia can be, but then the next season some people keep mentioning things like this.
Even if she did kill him, he was like dying anyway, so.
I can only guess that this was all so that Georgia could feel some reckoning for her actions and have some growth during her court arc in season 3. This particular choice is dumb because it doesn't make sense for Georgia to do this. Yeah, sure, let's say that she was doing a kindness for Cynthia because Cynthia opened up to her and told her that she wishes it would all be over, but it was dumb for Georgia to straight up involve herself in some other people's business either way, and you cannot deny that. She literally tripped on a flat road. And it kinda goes against the whole I do everything for my kids shtick, which doesn't make sense, but you get the point. But while attempts to include therapy and portray Georgia in a bit of a shadier light are objectively a good thing, they are still a half measure at best in the context of the entire show. Now, if you take one good look at the title, which simply reads as Ginny and Georgia, you would assume that you would have the two characters of a mother and a daughter basically leading the show together, which is kind of what happens. They are the two main leads having their own distinct struggles and storylines to deal with. The title also goes well with the whole us against the world that a pair of them have going on and the show insists on happening. I mean, poor Austin I guess, but let's move on. So we have an interesting dynamic at play. A mother who is rather young to be a mother as per expectations, with a teenage daughter. The two of them clearly went through a lot, so there's automatically a lot of area to explore with these two characters. Now my main question today is whether the show sufficiently accommodates these two main characters. An outstanding flaw, at least throughout the first season, is that the show treats both Ginny and Georgia as main characters, but the show's writing suggests that there seems to be some confusion and internal infighting in the plot itself about who the actual main character is here. The thing about these two characters is that, at least at first, these two characters' perspectives are in opposition to one another. Not directly, but in the first season and subsequent seasons, this pair has conflict, which is really the crux of a lot of the issues within the show. There is a thing that separates these characters from the rest. That is narrative distance. That makes sense. We are pretty up and close to both Ginny and Georgia. We get to hear their inner monologues and get a ton of screen time devoted to both of them. But there is yet still a difference in the way the show services these two characters, because they use a very specific device for Georgia, flashbacks. Ginny, however, gets significantly less flashbacks, and by significantly, I mean Ginny gets maybe one flashback. Yes, Ginny is present in them, but they are not really used to say anything about her. They are used more so to say things about Georgia. If you put it in those specific terms, it certainly doesn't feel like things are moving in tandem, and just on paper, you can already see that there is a slight narrative favoritism in all of this. You see, I will agree with the show in saying that I think in the instance of Georgia, flashbacks are essential in constructing her portrait. She isn't really a person that opens up about her past so often, so it kind of makes sense. The interesting thing about Georgia is that she has this vibrant, larger-than-life personality that really doesn't give away much about her. She really isn't the one to go about and complain about her own past, which is definitely admirable given the wider context. The flashbacks reveal all sorts of things about her. She grew up in a trailer park, her father is in prison for trying to kill her and her mother, her stepfather abused her and so she had to run away at the age of 14. She also had to take care of her younger sister because her mom was abusing drugs, so she didn't get a good upbringing at all. Then she got pregnant soon after, and then had to raise that child alone. Then she got together with a man who was straight up abusive to her. Then she was with a man who was abusing her daughter, and so she decided to kill him. This isn't a complete list of things, but Georgia has a very deep past that she hides under her persona, so these flashbacks provide us with a look under all of that, which is fine. Then you also have the fact that she is indeed a mother. I think that it can be generally agreed that motherhood elicits strong emotions in the audience. Motherly sacrifice as a theme is strong intrinsically and it can be moving. With Georgia, you can see that as a mother she's trying her best. I feel like these flashbacks do wonders to show how far she has come as a character. It also does wonders to put all of her actions in context. Georgia does a lot of questionable things like literally murdering people, but they are usually wrapped around her being a mom, which makes these things just so slightly easier to stomach. You cannot help but see that Georgia doesn't really have a lot of ways to deal with the problems that she has been handed, so she does her best with what she has. I think it is also very crucial to view Georgia's beginning in life as somewhat a start of a cycle, of a very vicious cycle, because considering her circumstances, she didn't really have many resources to properly cling into the ropes of life and have a nice, proper start as an adult. Think about it. Other people usually have nice parents to help them out, a whole load of time before they get children and start families, and usually people get to a point of stability before jumping into family life. Georgia didn't have that, and had to get to that point of stability while already having a child, and that is insane to think about and incredibly hard. You also get swept away by her charm and charisma and her little schemes that the show is so fast to display as quirky and girl bossy that, well, it can be all too hard not to root for Georgia. She is a survivor of many things through and through, so I don't blame people for rooting for her because, well, you just kinda want to after knowing the full context. With all of that being said, the narrative just favors Georgia in more ways than one. I think that really came to bother me is that the favoritism extends not only to the flashbacks, but also the main narrative. We see Georgia get a job at the mayor's office through her charm and wit, and that is fine. We also get to see her commit all sorts of shenanigans and get them go her way, but after a certain point, I don't know, it just feels unnatural and kinda camp. The first time I really felt that was in season 3, when Georgia was under house arrest, and then she just calls up the mayor's office to suggest an event called Lawn Fest, where each house would host a small business of Wellsbury, and then everyone is like, wow, this is brilliant, wow, she's amazing at this. But it's like, I'm sorry, but Lawnfest sounds kinda cringe. And the show is just full of these moments where Georgia just comes up with random stuff and everyone is like, oh wow, this is amazing, we smashed records with this. Which does get annoying after a certain point because her suggestions sound like they would only work in a campy TV show. So what I am trying to yap at here is that if the show was realistic, Georgia would face way more consequences for the stuff that she pulls, which would end up painting her differently. But what we have now is a pretty selective picture of Georgia most of the time. The show certainly has moments where she is deeply flawed, but the overwhelming picture is just a little too good and can't stretch the bounds of realism. Now, if you would just allow me to extend this chain of thought further, there is another purpose of these little flashbacks. I find it interesting that Ginny's main narrative starts at roughly where Georgia's flashbacks start. They are both at similar ages, so I suppose it is intentional that they contrast each other. Ginny's current life is quite different from the life that Georgia had, and Ginny's life is certainly not perfect, but it does reflect that Ginny is seemingly living a life that her own mother didn't have, and that contrast is kind of powerful, I will give them that. It says something parents sacrificing for a better life for their kids. So I feel as far as Georgia is concerned, they do a pretty good job in humanizing her and grounding her in her context. But then we get to Ginny, and I am not sure that the same can be said about her. I think that this is the best time to talk about the good old rule of show don't tell. I think it is pretty safe to say that Georgia's perspective benefits from this quite a lot. What show don't tell is that if character is sad, you don't have the character say I'm sad, you rather show them crying, screaming, throwing up, however else sadness is expressed. It's great stuff, it's pretty simple and it works. With Georgia, the flashbacks create a striking image, and I say that because, for example, we get to see Georgia visibly way younger, and seeing a young girl in scenarios shown in these flashes is certainly a convincing visual. Seeing her children be toddlers is also equally as striking. I feel like these flashbacks do convey the gravity of Georgia's situation really well. Seeing it unfold in front of you is something irrefutable, something that you can't really ignore versus if it was simply said or stated. You cannot accuse a character of overreacting or dramatizing things if you actually get to see it. And this is exactly where I think the show sometimes fails the character of Ginny. Sure, the second season has therapy in it, but guess what? She just talks about what happened. Yet we hear nada about her life before Wellsbury, aka the life from which most of her frustrations actually stem. And I don't want you to get it all twisted. I am not calling for Georgia to be completely demonized or for Ginny to be completely beloved and never hated. I think that it is definitely okay to hate Ginny or love Georgia. These are just fictional characters, it's not that deep. But it sometimes does feel like the show is kinda scared to actually delve into Ginny's life just so that it could upkeep a specific image of Georgia. Now listen, I can admit that there definitely were moments where I did not like Ginny. Plenty of them in fact. She also straight out cheats on her boyfriend Hunter with Marcus, and this is just the first season. In subsequent seasons she also has her moments, season 3 specifically, considering she tries to full on scheme just like her mom and frame someone who didn't kill anyone for murder. I think I won't be redefining the discourse of this TV show by saying that Ginny is kinda not too far off from Georgia in her behavior. Certain other actions can also be traced from the way that she was raised. The way she only really thinks of herself when she proceeds to cheat on Hunter, the way she can be just self-centered in general. You might say that Georgia isn't like that, but I would dare to kinda disagree. You see, the thing about Georgia is that she's very abrasive in the way she handles herself, and when it comes down to it, she uses other people around her as tools to further her own agenda. Ginny may not have been as explicit in this, but she can be the same way as Georgia. So what the hell separates the two of them? I guess Georgia is way cuter in the way she manipulates other people, but make no frigging mistake, she does manipulate. The bigger thing here to uncover is that people soften their views on her because she has a motive and a string of unfortunate circumstances to back up her behavior. Yet Ginny doesn't have a motive that would explain her behavior. She doesn't have children she does everything for. She does have a string of unfortunate circumstances, but not the same as her mother. But, and this is a big but, the unfortunate fact is that these unfortunate circumstances are caused by her upbringing, and in that upbringing, Georgia happens to be heavily involved. It is an interesting position for the show to be in, because it does want to portray Georgia as a devoted mother who is misguided, rather than a horrible person or a monster. But yet, it never really devotes enough screen time to fully portray Ginny's perspective through her past experiences. I think that this is the link between Ginny and Georgia that goes missing. To their credit, seasons 2 and 3 try to rectify this. Ginny goes to therapy, she talks about her feelings and her upbringing, or the things that she can talk about. Yet the show still doesn't take that extra step to actually show us her upbringing. Because I encourage you to take a look at the flashbacks themselves. Yes, while they may include the children, they are never actually focused on the children. They are always used to say something about Georgia, but they are not really used to see anything about Ginny. They usually show her getting out of difficult situations, but they do not show how exactly those situations affect Ginny. Well, Andrew, there are flashbacks where she tells Georgia about her issues. Yeah, yeah, I mean, again, the key word here, she tells. Here you clearly have an instance where Ginny admits to straight up being bullied by other people due to her living situation.
Be honest with me. Do you actually have a lot of friends at school?
These two girls, they asked if I was poor because of my clothes.
And what does the show do? Georgia hears this and then decides to go out with Ginny to buy her clothes.
Wasn't that fun? Skipping school and going to the mall.
Is it good of Georgia? Of course it is. But it also feels kind of manipulative. It is a pattern that the show has. Whenever Ginny has an issue, Georgia is shown to swoop in and just scheme around it, or is shown to be a devoted mom and kinda save the day. But it just takes away from Ginny's experience because it ignores the before and the after of this specific situation. Because bullying wouldn't have come out of nowhere. This issue existed long before, and it wouldn't be solved by a single shopping spree. The show just takes these very specific moments. It cherry picks. And that, I think, is just a bit of a disservice. Again, remember when we talked about showing and not telling? Well, all of the backstory and the hardships that Ginny mentions so casually throughout the show in the present day, none of them were actually shown to us. I feel like people have a hard time fully grasping the situation of Ginny because they have not fully shown it. I feel like there is a lot of warranted frustration on behalf of Ginny, considering that due to her turbulent upbringing, she couldn't really have friends. Also, she had to constantly adapt to new surroundings and just didn't have the stability that she needed. And we clearly see all of that affecting the way she deals with friendships and relationships she has, and not in a very positive ways at that. I think it makes a ton of sense that she comes off as bad friend and girlfriend, because how else would she come off? She never had a proper model to learn from. There's also the fact that Ginny doesn't even have a proper reasoning at first as to why she's moving around all the time and why her life is the way it is. Another way that the flashbacks are a disservice to Ginny is that the audience finds out information way before her. That information is usually used to paint Georgia in a sympathetic light, which makes Ginny come off as harsher than it should, because how dare she talk to her mother the way that she has, when her mom did so much for her. The way Ginny pushes for information might not be ideal, but she did deserve at least some answers, and her frustration at her mother hiding things from her was justified. And even then, while she may feel more sympathetic towards her mom, it doesn't mean that her frustration and discontent with her life is completely invalid now. Because the sad reality is that just like any other kid, Ginny did deserve to have a stable home and upbringing, but didn't exactly get it. I will be honest, the general discourse around Ginny tends to be so extremely weird. I implore you to truly fully consider Ginny's position. She is just a child. What usually goes just straight up missing when discussing Ginny is that an adult doesn't need a child, but a child definitely needs an adult. Ginny being a child places her at an inherent power imbalance. She is not responsible for the way her life is. Whatever control she has, for example, in her school friendships, yes, she can be faulted for it, but she should never be faulted for having frustration and anger at her mom. I am not even sure why this needs to be pointed out, but apparently it does. Some people out there really be like, Ginny acts as if she is the victim. But like, she kind of is a victim. I think that some flashbacks to actually show any of this would have done a lot for the character of Ginny and perhaps make her less hated in general, because at the end of the day, she's just a teenager and just a kid from a broken home. For Georgia, of course it comes as a huge blow that after everything she has done for Ginny, it is a slap in the face when Ginny proceeds to act out. But Ginny is valid in the way that she feels. Georgia having a cool motive to commit crime does not erase the trauma that Ginny has from her upbringing. That is why I do find it a bit manipulative of the show to only show flashbacks of Georgia, showing how rough her life was, and then only focus on the current life that Ginny has, which seems far more polished and lavish than the one that Georgia had in the past. You also have to remember the fact that her dad wasn't even in the picture for the majority of the time. Say what you will about Georgia, but at least she was there for her kids. So let's talk about the deadbeat dad, Zion, because not to mention him at all would be unfair and a disservice to Georgia. And I also love to see Mr. Gummy Bear be ripped a new one so. Now the situation with him is not as clear-cut. Georgia had done some iffy stuff where she ran away from Zion, mind you, after his parents pressured her to basically give up Ginny. But I don't feel like Zion is particularly a good dad. From what we are shown, Zion has the very convenient way of showing up when things are relatively okay. It is uncomfortable to sit and watch when this character is yapping about all the traveling he did, while Georgia was all on her own holding down the front, at home raising their child. He kinda pisses me off, if I'm being completely honest, because to think that Georgia had to do all of these sacrifices to be with her kids, while this dude just got to jet around the world carefree and then just swoop in whenever it was convenient. I liked how season 3 really dug in and emphasized the fact that he was not there for a lot of things that happened to Ginny. And then he has the audacity to try and file for joint custody when Ginny is already 16 and the majority of parenting is already done. The situation is not without its nuances though. It does feel like Zion is acting more so out of guilt rather than some malicious intent. He is not too far off from George in that sense. He does seem to have the right intention at heart, but he goes about it in very wrong ways. And this is just yet another instance where I would have wished to see a flashback or two of Ginny potentially reaching out to Zion during a critical moment where she really needed him, yet him not being present. I do feel like it introduces a whole different dynamic into a child's life when the father is completely absent and just returns when it is most convenient. The show seemingly takes the same approach with Zion that it takes with Georgia and simply neglects to actually show Zion not being there throughout her childhood. Sure, we get to see him be absent in her later years, but not nearly enough in regards to how it affects Ginny before Wellsbury, which only makes me question, did the show do enough from the outset to portray Ginny with the delicacy that her situation requires? I think that if a lot of people fail to sympathize with and fully understand the one person in this show who has been hurt a lot, the show has a problem. But I also feel as though it is certainly unfair to pit Ginny and Georgia against one another because it is Ginny and Georgia. But the show doesn't exactly do enough to prevent that from happening now, does it? It does something else though. It takes away from Ginny's characterization to serve as Georgia's. I don't necessarily want to bash the show for this too much. Motherhood is an interesting subject that usually just evokes a lot of emotion and imagery, and I do feel like Georgia's portrayal is very interesting. She is a complex character. I love to see her on screen, but you can see that the show just ends up in many situations where Georgia just genuinely tries to be a good mother and shows genuine emotion and care towards her kids, and it really is disarming. It does feel uncomfortable to see Ginny blame her mom when we know the wider context, but the situation is uncomfortable. That is just what is true, and the sad reality is that Ginny is very traumatized, and just straight up not giving it the screen time that Georgia's backstory gets is weird. Why can't we have material shown to us that would make us more sympathetic towards Ginny? Therapy sessions will certainly not hit as hard as tangible scenes. A TV show is a controlled environment, and writers choose exactly which scenes and parts of a character to show, so I cannot help but see just how selective the show is with clinging on to this grand idea of Georgia doing everything for her kids. I have to give credit where it is due though. Season 3 was all about the idea of Ginny becoming way more like her mom. The season kind of flips the script and makes Ginny protect Georgia with the same tools that Georgia used to protect her, and that is a good piece of writing. But is that enough? Perhaps this is all a step taken in caution rather than some skewed belief. I would imagine that the show is trying to be mindful about its depiction of a survivor who has experienced sexual assault and domestic violence, which is not a bad thing at all. But another sad fact of the show's reality is that Ginny is the direct response to and result of Georgia and Zion. It doesn't work the other way around. So whatever faults and misgivings you perceive in Ginny, those faults are also a result of Georgia and Zion and their actions. Ginny didn't come out of nowhere and just decided to burden her mom. The funny thing is that when I watched the first season, I already understood this. The first season had all dimensions of what Ginny has gone through, but a few lines of dialogue can go unnoticed really fast in the flamboyance of Georgia. So at least in some way, the show misses out on a world of nuance and doesn't do enough to make the audience understand. If you want to engage in weird tribalism surrounding the main characters, this is not the show to do it. It is Ginny and Georgia, not Ginny or Georgia, not Ginny/Georgia. And that is completely correct. Without Georgia, there would be no Ginny. They are best viewed as products of generational trauma, because Georgia was haunted by trauma that was imposed upon her, just the same way that Ginny is haunted by her trauma imposed by choices of Georgia and Zion. And Georgia is the mother she is because of her trauma and in spite of it. It just goes around and around. It is a chain reaction. Neither of them are to blame for whatever emotions they still carry from it. So before you think about hating on Ginny for what she does or does not do, I want for you to consider why she does or does not do. Before you go on to defend Georgia from Ginny, consider Georgia's part in the situation. And if you choose to hate Ginny and not Georgia, perhaps you need to reconsider that. And that, I suppose, concludes the strange case of Ginny and Georgia.